learnt many lessons over the course of their 3 years fighting the Russian armed forces during the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Over that period, the Russians have also adapted and brought into the field new capabilities and tactics. While NATO would fight very differently, there are nonetheless important lessons for our own forces if they wish to remain competitive. At present, the Russians use a number of capabilities to cause the Ukrainians significant tactical problems. The first is mass and the continuous skirmishing that they are able to impose on Ukrainian units. The second is dense ISR UAVs that are flying deep behind Ukrainian lines to map and track their resupply, find their command posts, and identify and enable strikes against air defense positions. The third would be wire-guided and radio frequency control guided UAVs that are used to attack and attrit Ukrainian vehicles, artillery systems, and personnel as they try and resupply or casualty evacuate behind the front line. Fourth would be the VKS, the Russian Aerospace Force's use of glide kits on what would otherwise be dumb bombs to deliver extremely high payload munitions onto Ukrainian positions from distances of up to 70 kilometers. The Ukrainians are struggling to cope with this combination of threats. It would pose different challenges for NATO, but nonetheless, there are clear takeaways. The first is that NATO has a massive asymmetric advantage in our air power, and if we wish to deter further Russian aggression, we should double down on that advantage. So long as the US Air Force remains heavily invested in European defense, NATO's posture is credible and there is a high level of capability. But if the US significantly redistributes its assets to the Indo-Pacific theater, then NATO air forces lack command and control, they lack the training, and they lack the munition stockpiles to be able to contest Russia's air defenses and to be able to hold Russian aircraft at risk. That could have very serious consequences for NATO ground forces. The good news is NATO has the building blocks. It has large fleets of fifth-generation fighters and very well-trained and capable and adaptable fourth-generation pilots. And so by giving those personnel the appropriate munitions and the appropriate training, it would be possible for European NATO to bypass that threat from the VKS and therefore to reverse the challenge of air superiority against Russia. The second lesson that I would highlight is that counter-UAS capabilities are fundamental to the survivability of a modern force. These need to be available throughout your tactical echelons, and they need to include both electronic warfare and hard kill systems that are cost efficient in engaging UAVs. The technical solutions exist, but the doctrine and their presence within the force is not yet mature. And so it is important that if European armies are to be capable of fighting on the modern battlefield, they accelerate the introduction of those systems. It's also evident that we have a problem in our rear area. We have presumed that once we are beyond line of sight, movement is sufficient to provide protection. What we are seeing in Ukraine is that movement attracts interest and that the Russians are able to strike those vehicles. That has profound implications for how we provide medical support, how we resupply our units, how we maintain tempo on the battlefield, how we disperse and protect our command posts. And we need to be making sure that our doctrine is keeping pace with the threat. Current NATO doctrine and TTPs on exercise would not be adequate. Again, we know what the solutions are. However, we don't always have the equipment to deliver it. What the Ukrainians are finding is that even for logistics units, armored personnel carriers, for example, that are cheap, moderately protected, highly mobile, and robust, easy to maintain, are fundamental to their ability to preserve their force over time. And so in Europe, where we have focused on extremely exquisite, expensive infantry fighting vehicles, which still have considerable utility in a range of tactical scenarios, we have lost the ability to mass produce vehicles that have significant utility but are much simpler. And it is important that our forces look at how they replace very old, often, fleets of APCs that have disproportionate utility for the survivability of the force. In the British military, that would be a replacement for Bulldog. There will be further lessons as the conflict goes on, and RUSI will continue to examine what we can draw from the fighting in order to make sure that we can deter in the future.